Okay, in this tutorial for new Blender users, I'm just going to give you an idea of how I work within the Blender environment and show you some of the really important tools that I use for navigating the scene, and this will really help you out a lot. So basically, I'm holding down the wheel mouse right there just to rotate around this object like this, or I use the wheel mouse to zoom in and out like this. If I hold down the control key though and use the wheel mouse left and right, or the shift key up and down like that. And one of the coolest features is if I say I add another object over here, if I say Shift A, add a sphere to the scene, better go get a color. I have a preset color in here. I'll just use green like that. And if I hold down the wheel mouse and I rotate, I'm rotating around. I want to rotate around this object, but I'm not doing it. So I press the period key or the DEL on the numpad, and it centers me onto that object, and then I'm rotating around that object. And that's really useful if you go into edit mode also, and say with vertex select active, I grab a vertex and I move it out here, and say I want to edit around here, I can also press that same period key or the decimal point key, and now I can navigate just around that point, and that's really helpful for editing. I mean, really helpful. Okay, so and then sometimes you want to measure things. If you bring up the tool properties here like this, there's a ruler protractor. This works in all views, but you say maybe overhead in ortho view gives you a pretty good idea. So if I just click this and I then left click, I can measure immediately here to different distances. And you notice mine's indicated in centimeters and then in meters, and that's because over in here, well, you can't see it while I'm interactive, I'll show you here in a second. So I'm getting the distance, but if you also come here and just click between the two endpoints on this, you can then get an angle as well. And this angle is always going to be in degrees, even if you have it set otherwise. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to escape that, and then over here where you set your settings, typically I'll work in radians. But even if you have this in radians, this protractor still only shows in degrees. So that's one of the things that's not synced together, but generally everything is usually synced up pretty nice. Alright, so then I'm going to press 5 to go back to perspective mode, 5 to ortho, 5 to perspective, 0 for camera mode. Of course I use this all the time. If I press N, I come out here in camera mode, I lock the camera to the view, and then that makes it my new view. And then I unlock it. I've showed that plenty of times before. Some of the other things that I use a lot, typically if I'm programming, but you can use it otherwise, is this menu up here for navigating through the scene. Sometimes I'll switch between default view and scripting view, but all these are accessible with the control key and the right and left arrow keys. So if I do control right arrow key, it's going to take me to that. If I do it again, it'll take me there, and then control left arrow will take me back. So you can just scroll through the list and get to different scenes. So control right arrow, control right arrow, control right arrow, and then left arrow back. And the nice thing about it is, since these data blocks allow you to have your own view, one of the great things is you can work in different environments. And here I'm working within Blender Render, but maybe I want a new view. So I'll start a new thing and I'll call it Cycles View. And then, so now I'm in a different view, and maybe I'll do this. I'll grab this and I'll look at Cycles Rendered View in here, and then of course I need to be in cycles render like that. So there's my cycles view. So then when I'm over here and if I'm scaling this, you can see it change in here. And if I just want to work in my regular default view, I just switch back like that. And even though this says well, actually that doesn't work in that sense, I need to put this into Blender render mode in that sense, but at least it allows you to change your windows up. And then one of the other super important things that I use is, let's bring up the properties window, N here. See, I've scaled this up a little bit. Let's get rid of this object. Alright, I'm going to put the cursor to the center with Shift S, then cursor to the center, and I'm going to press Shift A and add a cylinder. Then notice that's an 8-sided cylinder. That's because if you bring up this window T, I have it set to 6 vertices for the cylinder. And you have to do that before you go editing this thing, otherwise this menu option will disappear. And I'll show you what I mean. Like if I click on that here and I start doing something to it, suddenly that's gone. I can't change it beyond that 6 sides. It's only when you first put it into the scene like that. But the really important thing is, notice I put it in here and it has a scale of 1, 1, and 1, right? And if I was to scale this up, if I press S and I scale this up, You can see the dimensions are changing here, but it's also changing the scale. But for rigid bodies, if you're working with that, it's better to use this as a scale of 1, 1, and 1. And the way you do that is by pressing Control A. And then you can apply the rotation scale or location to basically make it the default value. So if I apply the scale, suddenly that is 1.0. It's still the same physical dimension, but its scale is just 1, 1, and 1 like that. So that's really helpful. And you can see it also in rotation. Like with here, I'm looking at the global axis like this. So now let me look at the local axis, which is going to be the same because I haven't rotated anything. And if I rotate this on X by pressing RX and I rotate it like that, you can see I'm looking at the local axis because now Z is pointing along the axis of the object. If I go back and look at the global axis, it's still pointing upward like this. And sometimes I want this to be the new orientation for the local axis. For whatever reason, you'll find that you'll need that at some point. And so what you can do is you can also apply Control A. I apply the rotation in this mode, and now suddenly my local axis is pointed upward, even though my object is my local's up and my global's up. And that can help you out for certain applications as well. Alright, so and then one last thing is if you look down here in this window, sometimes I want to look at my measurements and of this object itself besides using the protractor ruler tool. So if you go into edit mode, and you have to be in edit mode, then you have these extra features down here. You can get the length like this, shows you the length, and you can get angles. I'll turn that off. There it is in radians. And so this is really useful. The really important thing about this is if you change, like this says, alright, let's look at it in lengthwise. This says 1.273 meters like that. Alright, I'm going to leave edit mode. I'm going to scale that up just a little bit. And I'm going to go back in. It still says 1.273 meters. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? So if I come back here and I press Control A and I change the scale, and then I go back into here, now it shows the real measurement again because I applied the scale. However, if you're within edit mode and then you scale it up, if I just press S within here and scale it, then it changes dynamically. Alright, so those are just super important things to be aware of. And yeah, really just okay. Well, this lesson's getting a little bit long, but these are really important tips, and I hope it helps you out, and I'll see you in the next lesson.